Mickle might has been mustered in this hall, my brothers. We Thursar have weathered the world even as it waxes dark. Not rime and wind, not wolf and bear, not even the deep hunger of winter will cause Thursey's people to grow weary or weak.
A familiar, imposing timbre resounded in Drast's ear, which nearly caused him to jump out of his skin. He never could quite discern from where exactly it came. She's come to finish what I could not, Drast. He echoed the voice. She's come to do what her god could not, no doubt. He snarled, clenching his teeth to keep back a giggle that threatened to steal his breath. We have to fight, brother. We cannot let her take my other arm. That is why she has come. That is why she has come, to take it. She wants to see what the left hand tastes like, just like when Wolos took my right.
I'm curious to know, because I don't think I've ever heard you answer this question, but where did your love for writing begin? And was it at a young age? Did you start writing? How did you get into writing?
I started writing really young. I actually finished my first short story when I was about 9 years old. It was a horror story that I wrote. Really enjoyed doing that. And I think for my early years, writing was an escape for me. It was my way of essentially going on my own little adventures, because we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't travel to far away lands. We did do yearly vacations, but I didn't really get to live this epic lifestyle growing up. And so it was my way of escaping, getting to explore that a little bit. And then my sister, my older sister, who's 13 months older than me, was really big into writing when we were growing up. I remember when she was, 12, 13 years old, she'd spend every day just hammering away at this story that she was writing, which was probably more of a soap opera than anything else. But I was just fascinated by the process and watching her do that. I was like, you know what, I'm going to do that too. And lo and behold, I just kind of took off with it. I probably superseded some of what she was doing. I had my first novel finished by the time I was 17 years old. I had an agent, and I was just very prolific in wanting to do that as a career.
When you picked it up, you were really heavily influenced into the fantasy genre. So what about the fantasy genre called to you? What was it that made it more prominent than any other genre for you to write in?
I read a wide variety of different books growing up, but I think fantasy is probably the one that really secured my imagination and fascinated me, just again with the worlds and the escape and these beautiful places that people built up. Whether I was reading R.A. Salvatore or Robert Jordan or J.R.R. Tolkien. I just love the imagination and the world building they did. And again, growing up, a lot of the play that I engaged in was imaginary play. I was out in the yard with sticks, rescuing princesses and fighting off, bad guys. And so it was almost like taking my play and bringing it over into literature. And I would clarify, I never really put down writing. This was a struggle I think I had a lot in my young adulthood, in my early 20s, is because I was going to college. I was getting a degree. I was reading literary journals and research studies and writing papers and all these very in-depth topics in psychology and sociology. And even as much as I delved into that for schoolwork, I always found myself going back to the computer and scribbling down words and escaping again into my fantasy world. I could never stop writing. I kept coming back and doing it no matter how hard I tried to say, you know what, I got to take life seriously, because my mom always said, get your head out of the clouds, Josh. go and get a job that's going to pay you money. And so I would always end up coming back to writing, just time and time again. That's what I would end up doing. So even during, my 12, 15 years of working in a professional field and having a graduate degree, I was still writing during that time.
Do you feel like you published at the right time, though, that it came to you in the right moment that it was time for you to move into that idea? Or did you feel like those 12 or 15 years where you were just kind of writing to write, did that seem like wasted time, basically?
I don't think it was. That's such a great question, because I've talked about this, I think, with younger writers many times about how you really have to put in the work before your writing is at a level to share with other people on a professional level. And I think that a lot of writers in the modern day, where it's so easy just to upload your book and push it out there to the masses to read, aren't necessarily ready for that step. And it's not that they'll never be ready for that step, but you have to put your work through these trials of continuing to, write. Sounds crazy, but write 1,000,000 words before you start sharing it with people, so you can really understand the craft that goes behind writing. If I would have shared those early scribbles that I had on paper, even my first novel I had done when I was 17, it would have been embarrassing. It probably would have crushed my need to write and put stories together. But by putting forth that work and finally being able to humble myself and listen to the advice of writers better than I was to change my craft so that it flowed better, I'm much happier with waiting 10, 15 years before putting anything out.
And you've worked a lot. You've worked with your brother. You've worked with your wife. You've produced content with both of them. Take us through how that process works. How do you guys work together? Was it different each time? Or I would assume that you and your brother have a different method than you and your wife.
Yes, we definitely do. My brother, honestly, is probably what's what I'm looking for. I don't want to say more firm-handed, but he definitely likes to take control of the writing process a little bit more than Lillian. Lillian and I are pretty good just kind of sitting down, and we just kind of put together the story. And she always says this, and I'm quoting her, so I'm not trying to be arrogant in this, but she says, her herself writes for the masses, for the mainstream. Just kind of sit down, grab a book, and be entertained, and then step away from that. And she says, Josh, you write for the intelligent crowd. You put in little breadcrumbs of information that makes them close that last page, and they have to sit down and think about it and be like, okay, now how does this apply to my life, and how do I incorporate this into my everyday? And so when her and I sit down and write, it's a for the masses type of thing. I don't try to pull her over into my writing style. I kind of let her take it and run with it, and we just kind of string together the story for entertainment. With JC and I, it really comes down to building the craft and building the book around a concept. We sit down and be like, okay, what do we want to teach during this book? What are the themes of this book? All right, so who are our characters, and how do we make them apply to those themes? How do we take the opposite characteristics of what we're trying to teach, and what pinpoints do we put in the story or along the plot line to force that character to become whatever it is that we're trying to talk about or what we're trying to teach about in the story? And so it becomes this much more analytical process in putting a story together with him.
Josh is a heavy plotter. He's probably one of the most prolific plotters that I know, and he's very good at it. And anybody who wants to take a look at what he does, he does a lot of talking about it on his website and blog and such. I'm curious though, how long does it take you to develop your process? And does it still evolve, or do you have a set routine down now?
In terms of the process of putting a book together?
Yeah.
I feel like I have a pretty set way of doing it now, which helps me write quicker than I did before. And nowadays I find more of a struggle with balancing writing time with marketing and going to cons and doing stuff on social media to kind of push myself out there to be known. But in terms of actually writing the book, I feel like I have a pretty set process, which is really comes down to spending about 2 weeks where I build the characters, I build the plot, I outline the story, I get it fully functional, and then I spend about 2.5 weeks writing the entire book.
What have you learned from that process or experience that you're taking into the next one?
Oh my gosh, I love that question, Joe. One of the things that I've learned, and this is something that JC, my brother, and I talk about very often as he's getting started on his first trilogy, is that when you're putting together a series, you always have to go back and like read details of what you put in prior in order to make sure everything flows and fits. Because again, if you don't do that, you're gonna have issues like the Star Wars movies where it's like, okay, how come Obi-Wan says he's never heard of an R2-D2 and he was with one for 3 episodes? So you end up having to like really go back and research and find information. But this is what I've learned. There's always an answer. There's always a connection. No matter how far separate it seems when you're kind of structuring that plot into the next book and putting it together, you can always find a way to link the two, especially in a fantasy world. Now, it may take you a little while to come to that light bulb that kind of goes off and lets you know, yeah, this is it. But there's always one. I've always found that I can link, you know, this over here in book 1 with this in book 3 with just a little bit of ingenuity.
You're going through, or you've done the audiobook process. What's one tip you can offer authors before they go through the same process?
You're not going to find a voice actor that's going to please everybody. I've learned that pretty strongly, and that I really appreciate the response I get from fans and their feedback about what works and what doesn't work. But at the same time, I've also realized that everybody's got an opinion on the issue, as they do with most things. And so find somebody that you like, somebody that works well with you on a professional sense, and move forward with that. Don't just essentially have this knee-jerk reaction based on what everyone is saying around you, or what a handful of people are saying around you.
And essentially, this is your baby. So, I mean, you had it in your head for so long, and you put it out there. How hard was it for you to let that collaboration happen, to tailor your own voice with when you were listening back to what the audiobook producer was giving you?
You know, it was challenging, honestly, because you go through a lot of steps putting together an audiobook. You have to not only make sure that the story reads fluently and that there's no real errors in the story, so he's not going to stumble over words in case there were any that were missed, but you also have to do this lengthy pronunciation guide. And the Calendar series has a lot of complicated words. A lot of them are based off Slavic language, consonant pairings within there. We have like M's next to J's and things like that. And so in my mind, when I'm reading through my story, I of course am based around an English language. So even though I like including some of the Slavic language for flavor, I don't necessarily pronounce it in the way that the voice actor pronounces it. And so you put together this entire pronunciation guide, send it off to them, and then they come back and they still read it in a way that it doesn't sound like it in your head. And there's some instances of it that's like, it makes you cringe. But there's other times that you see that and you go, I like his way better. Like that really adds some better flavor to what I was trying to accomplish than what I could have come up with myself. So it's a give and take. I think that's what's really important, which is what I like about my voice actor, is that he reads at a pace and at a level that anyone of any nationality can follow if they speak English, which is something that was really important to me, because my book does get picked up in Japan and Brazil and the Middle East and Germany and England. And we ourselves have certain, highs and lows, and, in the way that we speak and the way that we express emotion. But he is able to read the story so that no matter where you are, you can pick up the story and enjoy it and not necessarily have to read into those. And so that was one of the things that was really important for me, that I think has probably rocked the boat with some listeners. They're like, I want him to have more emotion here. Well, the emotion that you're looking for may not necessarily translate well to people that are buying that overseas.
Did you gain a respect for this medium doing this process?
I did. And I really enjoyed going through the process, to be honest with you, and putting together them and listening to it come alive on audio. It was almost more exciting for me in the end than having the book in my hand. Because it does add something to it. In fact, with Melkorka, I tell people I love listening to the audiobook more than I like reading the book in my hand. It's just so much more, thrilling. It fills me with a certain fire that I didn't know necessarily existed. And now that I have the second and third book being finished up in 2018 on audio, it's even more exciting because I'm going to have the whole series ready to go. But I am liking the platform. I'm enjoying it.
So what have you cherished most about being indie?
I think it's the community. I don't know that I see the same type of camaraderie around professional authors that I see around indie authors. I like the willingness to share information and sharing tips and tricks, and people are willing to even go out of their way to spend a little extra money to help indies kind of rise up, especially if they have the the know-how and the ability to rise up, but it's that community sense that's built up around them.
What's your best advice for someone transitioning into a life of a full-time writer?
Before you do it, you really need to make sure that you have a routine down and that you hold yourself to that routine. And I've talked about this, I think, in a recent interview with I Create Daily, is that it's really that routine that separates professional authors from amateur writers. It's being able to stick to the pattern and do it every day and know essentially what your vices are and withholding those vices so that you can be successful and keep moving forward. I think that's really what it comes down to. You can't slack. You can't just step away and be like, no, I don't want to write today, or no, I don't want to do this month, because it's your livelihood.
And so you can only. Are you interested in pursuing the acting thing again? Are you happy with where you're at right now, and maybe that's something down the line?
You know, if I was ever given the option to do acting, I would jump all over it. That was probably my dream before I was a writer, was to be an actor. I always wanted to jump into that lifestyle. I did a couple of independent films. I did independent acting for years when I was in high school. I was the lead in high school plays where I memorized 120, 200 lines. I love the acting environment. I enjoy it. If I was given an opportunity to go down that path and even step away from writing for a short period of time, I'd probably jump all over it just for the experience, which is, again, one of my life type of goals. I'm all about the experience and trying something new and doing something.